Digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6 today. In the next hour for you, union bosses have just said in the last hour the strike action planned this week will, I'm afraid to say, now go ahead. The talks that they were having failed to head them off. Millions of members of the public face travel disruption tomorrow, Thursday and Saturday, and frankly the days in between as well, as Britain faces the biggest rail strike in 30 years and more. In a few moments we'll cross live to the House of Commons to bring you a statement from the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. We've got the travel editor of The Independent, Simon Calder, who's actually surprised by how many trains are running. We'll let you know what he's got to say shortly, and the rest of the news about the railways this week, all coming up. Also, a new investigation suggests police forces have failed to solve a single burglary in some half of neighbourhoods in England and Wales. Former Detective Chief Superintendent at the Met, Kevin Hurley, will join us with his customary good sense. And we'll ask too, should we really be buying British? There are reports the Chancellor wants to offer firms who invest in British companies special tax breaks. We found a critic or two who says the proposals could violate the World Trade Organization rules. The question is, should we back British business? Of course we should, but how? Alongside me for the next 2 hours, having his say on the stories of the day, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, with strong opinions on the unions today. And the latest news headlines first come from Polly.
Colin, thank you. The latest news headlines from GB News, as you've been hearing. The RMT union has confirmed within the last hour that rail strikes will go ahead this week after last-ditch talks failed to resolve a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. The industrial action, due to start tomorrow, will be the largest in almost 30 years, with 40,000 staff walking out. The strikes will severely disrupt travel, with some train cancellations beginning this evening. Well, let's take a quick look then at the days affected. There'll be strikes tomorrow on both the national rail network as well as the London Underground. And then on Thursday and Saturday, there'll be further nationwide action as the RMT union and 13 other train operators continue their walkout. A severely reduced timetable is being introduced, with just 50% of the rail network open between 7:30 in the morning and 6:30 at night. The chair of the rail delivery group, Steve Montgomery, has apologised to passengers for the disruption.
Obviously, it's going to be extremely disappointing. We're really sorry for our customers that these strikes are going to go ahead. We've tried everything we can to try and avoid them, and we continue to try and avert the strikes, but clearly there's going to be disruption for people tomorrow when they go ahead.
Well, on top of that, criminal barristers in England and Wales have voted to strike themselves from next week over concerns about legal aid funding. The walkouts come at a time of significant court case backlogs. Other sectors could also see strikes this summer, with 2 teaching unions threatening to ballot their members. The National Education Union say teachers' pay has fallen by 20% in real terms since 2010. They're demanding a pay rise that's more in line with inflation. Heathrow Airport has asked airlines flying from Terminals 2 and 3 to cancel 10% of today's scheduled services. The decision comes after technical issues caused huge pile-ups of passengers' luggage at the airport. EasyJet also announced it's cutting thousands of summer flights to avoid last-minute cancellations. The move's also in response to caps imposed by Gatwick and Amsterdam's Schiphol airports. Energy companies will be prevented from charging high direct debits under plans put forward by the regulator Ofgem. The proposals also include rules to protect customers' credit balances and green levy payments if a company goes bust. Suppliers will also be required to have enough money on hand to make sure they can weather future energy shocks. The new head of the British Army has warned that troops must be prepared to fight in Europe as the war in Ukraine continues. General Sir Patrick Sanders says it's imperative that the army's ready to fight and win wars on land. Former senior military intelligence officer Philip Ingram says the UK's armed forces have to be prepared.
Always the danger, the longer a war goes on, that it's going to spill over somewhere, or something has to happen. The international community says enough is enough, and something has to go in and try and mop it up and stop it. So it's important that our military, especially the British military, our professional military, are ready, equipped, trained to take on any conflict.
Victims of grooming gangs in Oldham in Lancashire have received official apologies after a report said the police and the local council failed to protect some young people from sexual exploitation. The report, which looked into the alleged child grooming in council homes, shisha bars and by taxi drivers in the town, however, found no evidence of an official cover-up. Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, has commissioned the report.
It is never too late to face up to past mistakes, to say sorry to those who were failed, nor to prosecute those responsible for appalling crimes against children and young people. This review is helping us do all of those things and slowly but surely allowing the public to have confidence again.
2 people have been rescued after their boat caught fire on the River Solent near Portsmouth Harbour. The skipper issued a mayday call shortly before 3:30 yesterday afternoon, and lifeboats were on the scene within 6 minutes. After taking those on board to safety, rescuers attempted to put out the blaze, but flares and gas cylinders began to explode, engulfing the vessel in flames before it sank. The Duke of Cambridge has pledged to continue shining a light on homelessness and to introduce his children to charities supporting rough sleepers. Prince William, who turns 40 tomorrow, has written an article in the Big Issue magazine about his experience selling the magazine on the streets of London early this month. As an 11-year-old, the Duke was taken to a homeless shelter by his mother, Princess Diana, as she sought to broaden his horizons growing up. This is GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Brazier.
Well, yes, it is official. Tomorrow Britain will face the biggest rail strike in over 30 years. Millions of commuters facing disruption. Just how much? We'll have to wait and see, won't we? Last-ditch talks to stop the industrial action. They, as the language goes, broke down earlier with the Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers Union, the RMT, calling on its staff to walk out over stagnating pay and proposed job losses. Services tomorrow and Thursday and Saturday will be affected, and the days in between, of course, as we've been saying, with passengers warned not to travel unless their journey is essential. In a few moments, we'll cross live to the House of Commons. We'll hear there from the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. He's been doing the media rounds. And following last-minute talks to resolve the dispute which took place this morning, came to no avail. Let's start with the travel editor at The Independent, Simon Calder, who was telling us a few moments ago, Simon, that actually train services will run tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
They will run.
Yes. I mean, if you are not... if you're lucky enough to live in the half of the country, of the UK, where there are trains running, then you're absolutely fine. So let's start with Northern Ireland, absolutely normal. At the other end of the UK, the Isle of Wight. Don't laugh. The entire Isle of Wight rail network, which stretches for nearly 9 miles from Ryde to Shanklin, is going to be running absolutely normally from before 6 a.m. to after 11 p.m. So if you want to catch a train, that's the place to go. The rest of the UK, well, Wales is almost off limits. It's extraordinary. Nothing north of or west of Cardiff. Scotland, similarly, nothing north of Falkirk. So if you want to go to Aberdeen, Inverness, Fort William, anywhere like that, you're not going to be able to get there. However, if you are lucky enough to be in London and the South East, it's going to be fairly plausible suburban network running, as well as links from Ashford in Kent, Brighton in Sussex, Southampton, but not going to Bournemouth, Exeter from London, Paddington, also Bristol and Cardiff, continuing around the West Coast Main Line, Birmingham, Manchester, Glasgow, that will be running, Midland Main Line from London, St Pancras to Nottingham, Derby, Leicester, Sheffield, and then all the way around to the East Coast Main Line from London to Yorkshire and Newcastle and Edinburgh, and quite a lot of sort of busy links in the north of England and southern Scotland as well. So lots of trains running, and this is completely unlike, let's go back to the summer of '89. Now, me and Kelvin are the only people on Earth who remember it.
And Colin.
Come on.
And Colin.
But I remember it very well, because I was just coming back from a holiday in Turkey on one of the strike days, and I remember getting to Gatwick and spending almost as much in a taxi to get to London as I'd spent on the holiday. Now, tomorrow, you don't need to do that. 4 trains an hour, Gatwick to
Well, there's that point about the difference, Kelvin Mackenzie, but also in '89, I've read, I don't remember this, but I've read there were car parks, Hyde Park, Regent's Park, set aside for car parking.
Yeah, the truth about the matter was this was a much more dangerous economic problem, a national rail strike, than there's going to be this time. You're going to discover that actually it is a minor problem for you until everybody goes back to work. And on the days when there's not the strikes are on, yeah, the trains won't be there first thing in the morning, but they're going to be there at night. People have worked out, and I think COVID helped all this, and you are not having your life destroyed anymore by people who want to destroy it.
If I may, there will be an awful lot of frontline workers, exactly the sorts of people that the rail union should be supporting. Health workers, teachers, people who've got young people with exams. Those are exactly the people who are going to have to use the trains if they exist. And if they're not, they're going to be spending a fortune on taxis. Thank goodness the bus services are running normally. They'll be crowded. The roads will be busier than usual. So it's absolutely miserable. But there we are, a majority of 8-1 in favour of industrial action.
Yeah.
And,
well, they've got nothing to lose, have they? They're going to get 3 days' money this week anyway, and on top of that, the unions are going to top up their pay. So basically, the weather's very nice. They're going to be sitting on their backsides. Mind you, having seen, I mean, I have one chum at Waterloo Station. I've been saying hello to him for 20 years. He works at Waterloo Station. I have never seen him do 1 minute's work, and I suspect that the strike will be the equivalent of what he normally gets paid to do.
Well, we can't vouch for him, Kelvin.
Well,
maybe he's doing
you
an
should get
important
him
job.
on. You should get him on. He's the most entertaining character.
Maybe
Never done a day's work in his life.
His job's to entertain the passengers. He obviously works.
Can we just get into the nitty-gritty of what's wanted by both sides here? Because a lot of the focus, obviously, on the RMT wanting to keep up with inflation, anything up to 11.1% pay increase. It's not going to happen, particularly if you've got a treasury that's very conscious about the example that sets to others. But something that I looked at over the weekend, this idea of ticket stations, ticket offices, booking offices closing to save £500 million. I think there are only about 1,000 left in England. If you are somebody who's not au fait with apps, if you're somebody who's got a question about your season ticket, heavens above, have you tried to work it online? Some of the more complicated routing questions, you need to speak to a human being.
Yes, I know, but look, I think that what you're doing is talking down to the vast majority of our country. I do accept there will be some old ears out there of going on complicated journeys to which this is slightly a nightmare, but they have got relatives. Somebody can help them out. I think the whole idea of a world that hasn't embraced the online is absolutely ridiculous. Most people, I mean, I don't know whether you've noticed how many people are now using their smartphones now to pay for it. It's not just young people. It includes my partner. Now, if she's watching, that's a gag, right? But anyway, look, the truth about the matter is they should shut the places down. It's come to the end of its useful life.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. Look, for goodness sake, the RMT is kind of talking as though this is the railways exactly as they always were. The status quo was nothing like it. OK, the Office of Rail and Road last week said that revenue from season tickets has fallen by 72%. Yeah, they're trying to make a bit more with leisure, and so therefore what they're doing over the next 5 days is absolutely going to destroy confidence in that. But you haven't got the amount of money coming in. And so, therefore, any government of any colour would need to say, OK, do we want to get Colin and Kelvin to pay even more in tax than they are at the moment? Or should we smarten up and modernise the railways?
But as Grant Shapps said, we're going to hear from him very soon, Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary of the House of Commons, as he said last week, 89, the railways then were in competition with the motor car. Today, they're still in competition with the motor car, but they're also in competition with Teams and Zoom and Skype. And that's the reality that confronts the RMT, but the rest of us too, by default, of course. Let's ponder another dimension of this story, because one of the plans being mooted to tackle the strike impact is using agency workers to fill the void. It's technically illegal to do that. We'll discuss why in just a second. It would mean scrapping a law which currently bans businesses from doing so. Joining us is employment lawyer and HR director Amanda Lennon. Amanda, welcome to you. We think back, don't we, to what happened on the ferries, the idea of union-affiliated workers being ousted and replaced by agency workers. That was unpopular. It was on an infinitely smaller scale, obviously. Could it be done on the railways? Would they still be safe?
I think there are a number of agencies. If the government changes the law to allow agency workers to cover the roles of striking people, then there are a number of agencies who have those sort of skills on demand. But whether they can supply those in time for this week's strike is another matter, because, for example, if you look at the signallers, apparently it takes a year to train a signaller. So those agencies will have to have enough people on their books to provide that labour resource. That's going to be unlikely this week. For me, a key issue here is workforce planning. Employers don't do enough future looking in terms of workforce planning, checking that they've got the right skills in the event of crises like these. And that would be a good start for the future as well.
I just wonder also whether, Amanda, you'd have the situation... We've got Kelvin McKenzie here, former editor of The Sun. I'll talk to him about this in just a second, this idea of agency workers crossing picket lines. I mean, I know that's a dynamic we've not seen on any scale for decades, but that's not about planning or training. That's about an individual choice of conscience. Do I want to stand in solidarity with my trades union brothers, or do I want to go and earn my wage for the day and earn a scrap for my family? These are questions that go beyond training. They're political.
They are, and people will feel very uncomfortable crossing the picket line when their colleagues are out on strike, as you say. The law was changed about 7 years ago under David Cameron's government to make the rules around picketing stronger, to make sure that they were much more organised and less likely to turn violent. So there are some better protections in place. But nevertheless, it remains a very difficult situation for someone who either decides not to strike, or even if the law's changed and that person is an agency worker, so doesn't have an immediate affiliation with that union, to then come into work and go through the door.
Yeah, my understanding, Amanda, you'll know more about this than I do, but my understanding is that the government could do this relatively swiftly in terms of an amendment to that 2003 law. It would take a statutory implement to do it. But I just wonder what kind of signal that would send out, not just to the RMT, but to all trades unions, that they are saying, we can undercut your essential negotiating tactic. which is to go on strike. We can undercut it by making it lawful for a company or an organisation to bring in agency workers to fill the gaps left by your currently striking officials. I mean, I know the TUC and the trades union movement as a whole is not the force it was 30, 40, 50 years ago, but heavens above, it's a recipe for strife, isn't it?
It certainly is. And indeed, David Cameron did try to do this when he was Prime Minister, and he faced intense opposition from the unions, and eventually that proposal came off the table. I think that there are a number of really tough rules that unions have to meet in order to be able to go on strike in the first place. There is no legal right to strike as such, but when you can meet those criteria, then you can go on unlawfully strike. And so this type of legislation will risk fundamentally undermining the union's position in that scenario.
Amanda Lennon is an employment lawyer and HR director. Amanda, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
I mentioned Kelvin Mackenzie there. I did so, Kelvin, because, you know, you were in Fleet Street, Wapping, more importantly, when the strikes got very nasty.
And that was vile. 6,000 baying at you, surging at you, coming after you, you know.
People leave coffins in your front garden. Was that the
well,
truth?
they did more than that. I mean, the thing was an absolute nightmare. There was more than just coffins, I can assure you. But anyway, it's an absolute nightmare. And I think it's entirely correct that companies that are being brought to their knees by somebody who has some dispute with them should be able to fight back.
Kevin, Grant Shapps just appeared at the dispatch box. We can go there now, I think.
This weekend, we've seen union leaders use all the tricks in the book to confuse, to obfuscate, to mislead the public. Not only do they wish to drag the railway back to the 1970s, they're also employing the tactics of bygone unions too, deflecting accountability for their strikes onto others, attempting to shift the blame for their action that will cause disruption and will cause damage to millions of people, and claiming that others are somehow preventing an agreement to their negotiation. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't think the public will be hoodwinked. The families who will be unable to visit, they laugh, Mr. Speaker, but the families who will be unable to visit their relations, music fans hoping to go to Glastonbury, the students unable to get to their exams, their GCSEs and their A-levels, businesses just beginning to recover from COVID, and people who will miss out on their medical treatment because of these strikes. That is what they are supporting, Mr. Speaker. They know that this week's rail strikes, created by the unions, organised by the unions, is the full responsibility of the unions too. Of course, we're all doing our utmost to get the unions and the rail industry to agree a way forward and call off the strikes. Because in discussions like this, it's always the employer and the unions who need to get together and negotiate. And in this case, that's the train operating companies, it's Network Rail, and it's their union representatives. Mr. Speaker, we are not the employer, and we will not undermine the process as well. And I hear the calls of the Labour leadership opposite saying we should somehow get involved and perhaps invite the unions for beer and sandwiches to discuss the situation. Well, Mr. Speaker, we all know the leader of the opposition thinks a beer and curry is a work meeting, but we will be leaving this to the employers, who are the right people to negotiate with the unions. Indeed, the unions are in daily talks with the employers. Or at least they were, until they walked out an hour ago to go and hold a press conference saying that the strikes would be on. And, Mr. Speaker, we're doing everything we can, despite these strikes, to minimise the disruption throughout the entire network. We're working with the Civil Contingency Secretariat, the government's emergency planning team, to keep critical supply chains open wherever possible. Operators will keep as many passenger trains as possible running, though, of course, with as much disruption to the timetable, that is going to be very difficult on strike days. And it's estimated that around 20% of planned services will operate, focused on key workers, main population centres and critical freight routes. But there will be mass disruption, and we advise passengers to avoid travelling unless absolutely necessary, which of course, for many, it will be. The National Rail Inquiry's website will be kept updated with the latest travel information to ensure passengers can make informed decisions about their travel. And passengers are strongly advised to check before they travel and encouraged to look for alternative means of transportation if their journey is affected, including on the days between the strikes. We're looking at a variety of different options for the railways in order to maintain services amid disruption in both the medium and the longer term. We can no longer, Mr. Speaker, I think, tolerate a position where rail workers exercising their right to strike can do it without any regard for how the rights of others are affected. Nurses and teachers and other working people who rely on the railway must be able to travel. So minimum service legislation is just one part of that. Minimum service levels are a government manifesto commitment and will require train operators to run a base number of services even in the event of future strike actions. It's a system which works well in other countries, including Belgium and France, and so we'll be bringing in the legislation to protect the travelling public if agreement can't be reached when major disruption, as with the strikes this week, is expected. And the rhetoric we've seen from union leaders, Mr. Speaker, and the opposition benches over the weekend seems to be focused on widening the division rather than bridging the gap. The whole point of the railway reforms, based on the Williams Review, which engaged the unions very extensively, is to unite and modernise the industry. Just as we can't reform the railways with absolute technology, we can't do it by clinging to obsolete working practices either. For example, leisure travel at weekend is a huge growth potential at the moment. After COVID, people are coming back and travelling at the weekends more than before. But on most of the railway, under an agreement which dates back to 1919, Sunday working is voluntary. And so the industry can't do what everyone else does, what other businesses, what other organisations do and service their customers. Instead, they have to appeal for people to come and work, and sometimes that's simply unavailable, as happened when large football matches like the Euro finals were on. 170 trains were cancelled. And so the industry needs to change. Union claims that this is a strike about a pay freeze. But this, Mr. Speaker, is factually incorrect. We are not imposing a pay freeze. The whole point of these reforms is, in fact, to build a sustainable, growing railway where every rail worker receives a decent annual pay rise. But let me be clear. For modernisation and reform to work, we have to have unions who are prepared to modernise. Otherwise, there can be no deal. So this strike today isn't about pay. It's about outdated unions opposing progress that will secure the railway's future. And these strikes are not only a bid to stop that reform, they're critical to the network's future as well. They're going to, if these reforms are not carried out, threaten the very jobs of the people who are striking now, because they will not allow the railway to operate properly and attract back customers. So the railway's in a fight, Mr. Speaker. It's in a fight for its life, not just competing against other forms of public and private transport, but also competing against Teams and Zoom and other forms of remote working. Many commuters who 3 years ago had no alternative but to travel by train, today have other options, including not to travel at all. Rail has lost a fifth of its passengers. Rail has lost a fifth of its revenue. And since the start of the pandemic, the government's committed £16 billion of emergency taxpayers' support. We all know the numbers. It's £600 for every single household in this country, so that not a single rail worker lost their job. £16 billion to keep trains running, ensure that Network Rail and DfT contracted train operating companies weren't furloughed. Now, as we recover and people start to travel again, the industry needs to grow its revenues. It needs to attract back passengers and make the reforms necessary to compete. And the very last thing the railway needs and should be doing right now is alienating passengers and freight customers with a long and damaging strike. So, my message, Mr. Speaker, to the workforce is straightforward. Your union bosses have got you striking under false pretences. And rather than protecting your jobs, they are actually endangering them and the railway's future. We have a platform for change and want the unions to work with the industry and government in order to bring a much brighter future to our railways. And that means building an agile, flexible workforce, not one that strikes every time someone suggests an improvement to our railway. Strikes should be the last resort, not the first resort, Mr. Speaker. They'll stop customers choosing rail, they'll put jobs at risk, they'll cause misery across the country, they'll hit businesses trying to recover from COVID, they'll hurt railway workers themselves. So please, let's stop dividing the railway industry and let's start working for a brighter future.
I now call the Shadow Secretary of State, Louise Haigh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, no one out in the country wants these strikes to go ahead. But as I have repeatedly said, even at this 11th hour, they can still be avoided. To do so, it requires ministers to step up and show leadership, to get employers and the unions round the table and address the very serious issues on pay and on cuts to safety and maintenance staff behind this dispute. The entire country is about to be ground to a halt, but instead of intervening to try and stop it, the Secretary of State is washing his hands of any responsibility. On the eve of the biggest rail dispute in a generation, taking place on his watch, he has still not lifted a finger to resolve it. Not one meeting, Mr. Speaker. No talks, no discussions, only media interviews and a petition to the Labour Party. This is a grave dereliction of duty. And should these strikes go ahead tomorrow, they will represent a catastrophic failure of leadership. Ministers owe it to all those impacted by this serious disruption to get around the table for last-ditch talks to sort it out and avert this disruption. And if he won't listen to me, Mr. Speaker...
Can you two either go outside or be quiet for a little while? Louise Haigh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If he won't listen to me, Mr. Speaker, he should at least listen to his own colleague, the Honourable Member for Rossendale and Darwen, his own former parliamentary aide. He said yesterday, "I can tell you the only way out of a dispute is via negotiation. I'd call on all parties, including the government, to get around the table because this is going to have a huge negative impact on people's lives." His own MPs and the public know the only way to sort this out is for the member opposite to do his job. But that isn't all, Mr. Speaker. Because this week it was revealed that not only has he been boycotting the talks, he's tied the hands of those at the table. He and his department failed to give the train operating companies, a party to these talks, any mandate to negotiate whatsoever. One source close to the negotiations said, "Without a mandate from government, we can't even address the pay question." Today, the Rail Delivery Group confirmed they hadn't even begun those discussions. That's the reality, Mr. Speaker. These talks are a sham because ministers have set them up to fail. It is for the government to settle this dispute. They are integral to these negotiations. They cannot be resolved unless he is at the table. But it is becoming clearer by the day ministers would rather provoke this dispute than lift a finger to resolve it. The same Transport Secretary that just a few short weeks ago was feigning outrage over the disgraceful behaviour of P&O and who is now adopting their playbook. Replacing skilled safety-critical staff with agency workers cannot and must not be an option. So what exactly has changed between the Secretary of State calling on the public to boycott P&O and now that he is suggesting that their behaviour should be legalised? Madam Deputy Speaker, tomorrow we will see unprecedented disruption. We have been clear. We do not want these strikes to happen. Where we are in government, we are doing our job. In Labour-run Wales, a strike by train staff has been avoided. Employers, unions and the government have come together to manage change. That's what any responsible government would be doing right now. Because whether it's today, tomorrow or next week, the only way this dispute will be resolved is with a resolution on pay and job security. The Secretary of State owes it to the hundreds of thousands of workers who depend on our railways and the tens of thousands of workers employed on them to find that deal. Because those rail workers are not the enemy. They are people who showed real bravery during the pandemic to keep our country going, who showed solidarity to make sure other workers kept going into work. Some lost colleagues and friends as a result. They are the very same people the Prime Minister promised a high-wage economy to a year ago before presiding over the biggest fall in living standards since records began. There is still time for the Secretary of State to do the right thing, the brave thing, and show responsibility. Patients, school children, low-paid workers, the entire country needs a resolution, and they will not forgive this government if they do not step in and resolve it. Even now, at this late hour, I urge him, get around the table and do your job.
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker.
Order. No. Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, that was a lot of words to avoid using the three words, I condemn the false words. I condemn the strikes. I condemn the strikes. I remind the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's four words, and you can practice them. She can practice them if she likes, Madam Deputy Speaker. I condemn the strikes, will she? I'll remind the House that the honourable lady opposite is herself a former union official. She will know better. She will know better than most, therefore, that negotiations are always held between the employers and the unions. And she calls on the government to get the parties around the table. They are around. They were around the table, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable gentleman's right. They're not now because the union just walked out to call a press conference to call off the strikes. And she's wrong when she says that these strikes are about pay, she says they're about safety, and she says they're about job cuts. Let's just take those in turn. Pay. The unions wrongly told their workers that there would be no pay rise. There will be a pay rise because the pay freeze is coming to an end. So that was untrue. Safety. It is unsafe to have people walking down the track looking at the lines in order to check their condition when it can be done by trains which can take 70,000 pictures a minute and drones which can look at the lines overhead. Safety is about updating these outdated working practices, and if she cared about safety, she'd cared about modernisation. And job cuts. She will know that there's already been a call for voluntary job cuts. In fact, 5,000 plus people came forward for that. 2,700 have been accepted. This is about ensuring that we have a railway fit for the post-COVID world. And it is therefore crazy that the RMT jumped the gun. And before talks were even given a chance to get anywhere, they launched into strikes. And her calls for government to be more involved is just a desperate attempt to deflect from the fact that the Labour Party, who themselves, let it be put on the record, have received £250,000 from the RMT union between them and their CLPs. And that's nothing. £100 million from unions over the last 10 years are here today, as ever, failing to condemn strikes. Strikes which will hurt ordinary people, strikes that will hurt kids trying to do their GCSEs and their A-levels, strikes that will hurt people trying to get hospital appointments which have been delayed during COVID, and strikes which will even see veterans miss armed forces celebrations this week. There is no excuse for the Honourable Lady and her front bench team sitting on the fence. I can almost feel her pain as she resists saying the 4 words, "I condemn the strikes."
OK, well, that's where we leave the to and fro in the House of Commons. Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, his Labour opposite number, Louise Haigh there, and we expect that will carry on for a little bit, a bit longer. In the studio with me, Simon Calder, travel editor from The Independent, Kelvin Mackenzie, formerly editor of The Sun. I heard both of you groan at different points there. I'll take you back to the groans. Simon, even at this 11th hour, strikes can be averted, said the Labour Shadow Secretary. You wince because that's not true.
Well, no, and everybody knows that that's the case, including Grant Shapps, who later said, "Oh, well, we thought we were having talks today. We thought we were going to get it called off." Absolute tosh. The very latest that anything could have been done about the strikes tomorrow or the disruption that's going to happen, even if suddenly there's a miracle and Mick Lynch phones up Grant Shapps and says, "OK, fine, we're going to call it off." It's still going to be an absolute disaster tomorrow because you cannot roster drivers, roster signallers, roster train conductors, guards, everybody else suddenly to come in.
You can't flick a switch and the train network comes back to life.
I mean, you're now... You wouldn't get anything like a normal service even on Saturday when the trains are... So everybody knows that's tosh. I assume that Louise Haigh knows that's a tosh, just as Grant Shapps does. She also said... the entire country is about to grind to a halt.
No, you've stolen Kelvin's groan.
Oh, no.
That was Kelvin's groan.
Oh, sorry, right, OK.
When she said...
Be careful, otherwise I get my union involved. The Union of Groaners. Louise Haigh would bring a tear to a glass eye, that lady. I mean, the idea, she said, the country is grinding to a halt. It's not grinding to a halt. Actually, it will carry on as though nothing happened. The world has changed. COVID changed the fact that we are likely to be at home much more often for working. I do recognise the one people I feel desperate for are anybody who had a hospital appointment that has now had to be cancelled. That is absolutely shocking and should be put right at Lynch's door. He is a disgrace. They don't care. They are using ordinary people as a battering ram to get money to which I have no idea whether they're entitled to it or not. What I do know is I don't want to pay any more for my tickets. I already pay the highest price in Europe, and I don't want to pay any more tax. I'm paying the highest tax rate now in almost 60 years. So I don't know who does want to pay this, but I tell you what, the public won't want to pay it, and they don't want to see their mums, dads, children who can't have hospital appointments because of this disgusting and disgraceful stoppage.
Kelvin, you got
to Kelvin...
Hold on a second. This is a member of The Independent. Carry on, sir.
Kelvin, for your ticket money that you spend, the highest in Europe, you get that nice guy smiling at you at Waterloo Station. What are you complaining about?
Yes.
OK.
I didn't realise that was included in the price.
But look at the numbers. And surely you would appreciate that any group of workers is going to do absolutely everything it can to be as disruptive as possible, particularly if they've got an 8-to-1 strike mandate in favour.
Simon, what about that point that Grant Shapps just made there about reforms? That when there's a problem with the track, people are still employed to walk it, when you could actually now send a train, taking 70,000 pictures, whatever it was, an hour, plus the drone.
He's absolutely right that here we are with this ludicrous agreement from 1919, which it was one of the first stories that Kelvin reported on. You haven't been... Sunday is overtime if you're working on the railways. Absolutely ludicrous. There's been quite a lot of governments since then which could have done something about it, and I think most of those have been Conservative. So for Grant Shapps suddenly to say, "Oh, look, I've just spotted this. It's terrible. We've got to reform."
By the way, in relation to that, having technology actually check the lines, actually 5 people died last year. Why? Because that kind of technology was not being used. They were ordinary, innocent people, just doing their job. Suddenly, along comes a train, they're dead. Right? So Lynch & Co. should take that. They're supposed to be there to protect their members. The best thing that can happen to him is bring in the technology tomorrow. And the idea that I didn't know about that 1919 thing, what a disgrace it is. Do you know what this all reminds me of? It reminds me of the printers. It reminds me of the printers. And I remember the printers saying to me, this will never change. You're the one that are going to get out of this industry, right? And I had a discussion based on that, being told that. But where are we today? Completely different. It will be different in 10 or 15 years' time. And the other question that you have to face yourself is, will we actually need anybody to actually drive our trains, have guards? I mean, why do we still have guards? There's a whole series of things which are going to have to change.
Can I just, while we're thinking big thoughts about the future of the railways, Simon, as I was brushing my teeth this morning, I was thinking, they've only got 25 years left anyway, the railways, haven't they? Until we have chains of driverless cars on the motorways.
Yeah, no, I think they've probably got a reasonable
He hasn't got
future.
25 years in him.
Thank you very much. They've got a reasonable future as long as they are modern businesses, but they're most definitely not. And you mentioned the guards. We had, I think, Angela Rayner speaking at the weekend saying it's outrageous. The railways are becoming a no-go area because lots of more and more trains don't have guards. Well, this is something, again, that has been going on since the 1980s and which Labour were partly responsible for imposing. So there is so much political grandstanding going on. And I tell you, my strong belief is that the government actually wants this strike to happen so that they can see if Kelvin's
Louise Haigh
right.
just said that.
Yeah. Well, no, I think she's right. And I think that the unions want the strike to happen because they want to go back to the 80s and to the days when they could shut down the country. And we'll find out largely tomorrow whether you're right or Mick Lynch is right.
Simon Calder, Kevin Mackenzie, we'll come back to this, I'm sure. But we're going to take a break now. But first, coming up, a new investigation suggests police forces have failed to solve a single burglary in around half neighbourhoods in England and Wales. We'll be talking to the former Detective Chief Superintendent of the Met Police, Kevin Hurley. That's next.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio. On digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Let's leave those train strikes behind us for a wee while and talk about this story instead. New reports suggest police forces have failed to solve a single burglary in neighbourhoods in around half of England and Wales. The investigation by The Telegraph found over the last 3 years, 46% of burglary cases closed with no suspect caught or charged. Vera Baird, the Victims Commissioner for England and Wales, has warned there is a risk burglars will feel they can steal with impunity if police fail to investigate incidents. Joining me now, former Detective Chief Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police, Kevin Hurley. Kevin, welcome to you. This is a shocker.
Well, it is for some, not for me. I was formerly the head of burglary volume crime at the Metropolitan Police, so I know exactly the approaches that need to be taken and what needs to be done. What we've seen happen over the last 10 years are two things, really. The first is austerity has resulted in a reduction of the workforce, about 18%, which means that specialist teams in every local area, whether it's Kingston on the edges of Surrey or Brixton, or perhaps Maidstone or Guildford or wherever, or up north, Newcastle, they've gone. Those officers have been taken away off those specialty burglary squads just to fill uniform slots. Combined with the issues of austerity, there's been a reduction in skill sets as people leave and new people come flooding in. So first off, there isn't the effort directed at burglary there once was. And the second point, oh God, I've lost my thread now. I was about to say that. I'm trying to think.
It's been stolen. Kelvin Mackenzie says it's been stolen.
Yeah, the second point is that the police chiefs have lost track of what is important to win public confidence when they decide what they're going to cut or what their priorities are going to be. Burglary is a very personal crime. It's very offensive to people. If someone's house is burgled and police don't turn up or are not seen to do something, that has a really significant effect on everyone they tell that the police don't care. So if we're talking about delivering influence so that the public are supporting and backing the police, you've got to look at what offences are really important and not run them down in importance. So first then, complete lack of resourcing, driven by austerity. And then second, police chiefs have reacted by not understanding that burglary is a fundamentally important thing for many victims. And if you don't concentrate on it, it won't happen. I used to say, even back in 2008, when I was working at the centre, to borough commanders, if you want to get your burglary down, you need to have a burglary squad because it works on other boroughs where they do it. If you don't focus on it, you've got to make the sacrifice and find those people from somewhere else. Because burglars generally don't do anything else. If they're burglars, that's what they do. And a burglary squad gets to know them, almost like they are their local crop. Get the people who know the burglars, work on it, focus on it.
Kevin Hurley, as ever, you put it very succinctly and you speak whereof you know, that's for sure. Kevin, thanks very much indeed. Kelvin Mackenzie alongside me. Of course, Kevin's right. You know, this is one of those incredibly crimes that can really have a corrosive effect on the victims, and you wonder why the victims' commissioners haven't made that abundantly clear to chief constables who've chosen, presumably, not to prioritise it. And the other point that Kevin makes so eloquently is this idea that it's not it may be a crime of opportunity, but it tends to be done by the same people, which is why you need specialist officers to tackle it.
Well, I'd be 101% in favour of us investing more money into our police force. But of course, I mean, one of the realities of our life is that this is following a line within policing generally. For instance, no supermarket, they can't call the police in unless £200 worth of goods have been stolen. It's no longer a crime anymore. It's a civil issue, right? So you ask, I tell you what, you get any supermarket manager on here to tell how they have to get together and, oh, look, it's over there, and they chase over there. So it's part of that research by the Telegraph, and good for them to have done it. Apparently in Sheffield, they haven't had one burglary solved in 3 years. So if you have anything stolen in your house in Sheffield, they know. There's no point in calling. The only reason you call up the police if you've had a burglary is to get a crime number. Everything, the whole of. So, and look, I agree with Mr. Hurley there. But what are you going to do about it? You're going to have to spend more money. Every single thing is costing money at the moment. And I wouldn't mind and I would be in favour of spending more money. Where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from your viewers, right? Our taxes will have to go up, or something will have to change, or we could stop handing out loads of money to people who don't deserve it. Heaven forfend. What about this ridiculous idea we're all going to be handed hundreds and hundreds of pounds energy, regardless of how much you earn, how much your viewers earn, right? Instead of that, why doesn't that money go towards fighting crime? I cannot understand anymore what is happening to what I thought was a Conservative government. It's part of a bigger issue.
Kelvin, for now, thanks very much indeed. Well, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, could be about to give tax breaks to companies investing in the UK. So says government sources who told Kelvin's old newspaper, The Sun, that the Treasury is considering slashing corporation tax for firms that invest in British machinery and tech. It's been called by some a victory for Brexit Britain. We're asking today whether this is the right approach if businesses should be incentivised to purchase goods from the UK rather than internationally. We're joined by Daniel Pryor, Head of Research at the Adam Smith Institute, and Jonathan Jones, who's the Managing Director of Tregothan, I'm mispronouncing that, Tregothanan Tea. Jonathan, you'll help me with it, I'm sure. I'm guessing you're in favour of buying British. Tell us why.
Very much so, Colin. And reducing taxes and incentivising companies to buy British is fantastic news. I feel sorry for the Adam Smith Institute trying to argue any otherwise, because, we've just spent the first half of our year paying taxes, and now we can actually go and make some profit. But if you think of which is Adam Smith's own reckoning, I think. But I think companies like Tregothanan, who grow tea in Cornwall and are now Europe's largest tea gardens, we're investing a lot into robotic tea harvesting. These are actually tea bushes here, and these are very labour intensive to pick. But we export British grown tea, and we supply British food and drink establishments all over the country. And we need to invest in technology, and any support and help. It won't just be about the bottom line benefit, but it will be in terms of raising awareness of what this great country of innovators is doing. For, the food and drink manufacturers, the farmers of Great Britain will benefit from what I think is being talked about.
Daniel Pryor, I'm guessing the sector we're talking about makes a big difference here. So, for instance, if we were talking about something that's absolutely integral to the defence of this country, missiles that seriously offer us a degree of protection that research and development that we do in our own country couldn't possibly match, at least not for years to come, then we buy it off the shelf from America, don't we?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think there's a different argument to be made about those sort of strategic industries. But where we can all agree is we desperately need pro-growth, pro-investment tax reform. But I just don't think that tax breaks for Buy British is the right approach. To me, it's a protectionist move that would end up lowering the quality of various products and potentially even spark a mini trade war. For me, the best of British business is more than capable of competing on the international stage without this kind of special treatment through the tax system, whatever happened to out and into the world and global Britain. And for me, to kind of quote Adam Smith, since he's been mentioned, it comes down to the fundamentals of economics. Why should we buy things from other countries when we can make most things here? Well, nearly 250 years ago in The Wealth of Nations, Smith wrote that we could grow coffee in Cornwall or grapes on Ben Nevis, but we tend not to because it would be vastly more expensive. And this is how we enrich ourselves, different countries specialising in different areas and us all getting richer by trading with each other.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with that, Jonathan Jones, is, let's not maybe, well, I think tea is an essential part, a staple, as many of our viewers and listeners I'm sure will agree. But, the problem is, if it's something which it relies on the supply chain, there you go, which if lockdown taught us anything, it's about the fragility of our supply chains. And it's fine, Adam Smith's vision of global trade is fine, as long as there's no crisis to contend with, Jonathan.
I think you're right. And I think also less tax is good for business generally. I think that's the key message. I think Daniel's right not to want special treatment. But I think what will happen by accepting the Chancellor's proposition is that people will suddenly realise that there's a lot more that we can do here in the UK, not just because of global warming or all those things, which people think are the case, but actually just because we always could. And, we're a nation of innovators, and it will encourage that trade, which then gets the critical mass going, and then we can afford to do more great things within the UK. I don't think it should be protectionist, but it will benefit from being taxed less. and then the businesses will grow, the industries will grow, and we'll all benefit from that. And then perhaps it may only be a temporary relief, but I think it would make a very positive impact on our industries, but particularly land-based. As you say, Colin, probably more true of certain sectors. But if you look at the Plimsoll analysis of what companies are doing really well post-Brexit, post-COVID, there are some surprises in there. And I think some industries would really benefit from, you might want to call it special tax treatment.
We've got to leave it there from a windy Cornwall. Fantastic setting, though. And our thanks to Daniel Pryor. Stay with us. More news coming up, especially on those rail strikes that will definitely now start tomorrow.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices. With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome to Brazier, coming up live at 5. Britain is bracing itself for the biggest rail strike in 30 years. Members of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union will walk out from tomorrow in a dispute over pay, pensions and redundancies and reforms. Last-ditch talks to stop the industrial action broke down. The RMT is warning it now has a mandate for 6 months of industrial action. Oh dear. We'll hear the thoughts of travel journalist and author of British Rail, A New History, Christian Wolmar. A new investigation suggests police forces have failed to solve a single burglary in around a half of neighbourhoods in England and Wales. Former burglar turned home security expert Michael Fraser will share his expertise. And reports suggest Prince William believes that a slimmed-down royal family is the best way to ensure its survival. Aides close to the Duke of Cambridge claim the future king also believes speaking his mind on issues close to his heart will help remodel the monarchy. We'll ask, should we have a slimmed-down crown? Alongside me for the next hour, having his thoughts on the stories of the day, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The top story today, the Transport Secretary says the government is doing everything it can to minimise disruption after the RMT union confirmed rail strikes will be going ahead from tomorrow, as you've been hearing. That's after last-minute talks between unions and industry chiefs failed to resolve a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. The industrial action will be the biggest in almost 30 years, with 40,000 staff walking out tomorrow and on Thursday, then again on Saturday. Grant Shapps told the Commons that around 20% of planned services will operate, causing problems for millions of passengers.
My message, Mr. Speaker, to the workforce is straightforward. Your union bosses have got you striking under false pretences. And rather than protecting your jobs, they are actually endangering them and the railway's future.
Well, the Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Hay accused Grant Shapps of washing his hands of any responsibility.
It is for the government to settle this dispute. They are integral to these negotiations. They cannot be resolved unless he is at the table. But it is becoming clearer by the day. Ministers would rather provoke this dispute than lift a finger to resolve it.
The chair of the Rail Delivery Group, Steve Montgomery, has apologised to passengers for the disruption.
Obviously, it's going to be extremely disappointing. We're really sorry for our customers that these strikes are going to go ahead. We've tried everything we can to try and avoid them, and we continue to try and avert the strikes. But clearly, there's going to be disruption for people tomorrow when they go ahead.
Well, criminal barristers in England and Wales have also voted to strike from next week over concerns about legal aid funding. The walkouts come at a time of significant court case backlogs. Other sectors could also see strikes this summer, with 2 teaching unions threatening to ballot their members. The National Education Union says teachers' pay has fallen by 20% in real terms since 2010. They're demanding a pay rise that's more in line with inflation. Heathrow Airport has asked airlines flying from Terminals 2 and 3 today to cancel about 10% of today's scheduled services. The decision comes after technical issues caused huge pile-ups of passengers' luggage at the airport. EasyJet also announced it's cutting thousands of summer flights to avoid last-minute cancellations. The move's also in response to caps imposed by Gatwick and Amsterdam's Schiphol airports. Energy companies will be prevented from charging high direct debits under plans put forward by the energy regulator, Ofgem. The proposals also include rules to protect customers' credit balances and green levy payments if a company goes bust. Suppliers will also be required to have enough money set aside for future energy price hikes. Victims of grooming gangs in Oldham in Greater Manchester have received official apologies after a report said police and the local council failed to protect some young people from sexual exploitation. However, the report, which looked into the alleged child grooming in council homes, shisha bars and by taxi drivers in the town, found no evidence of an official cover-up. Andy Burnham, who's the Mayor of Greater Manchester, commissioned that report.
It is never too late to face up to past mistakes, to say sorry to those who were failed, nor to prosecute those responsible for appalling crimes against children and young people. This review is helping us do all of those things and slowly but surely allowing the public to have confidence again.
Well, in other news today, a teenage girl trapped underneath fallen rubble has been safely pulled out after a house explosion in Burnley in Greater Manchester. Another man survived, but medics say he is seriously hurt. He's been airlifted to Royal Preston Hospital, and the authorities are still investigating what caused the explosion. 2 people were rescued yesterday afternoon when their boat burst into flames on the River Solent near Portsmouth Harbour. The skipper issued a mayday call after seeing flames on board. Lifeboats did arrive within about 6 minutes, with rescuers trying to put out the fire, but flares and gas cylinders began to explode inside. It's still unclear what caused the blaze. And the Prime Minister's reportedly feeling well after a minor routine sinus operation in a London hospital this morning. Number 10 confirmed Boris Johnson will take meetings this afternoon. And that's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Brazier.
Well, and the biggest rail strikes in 30 years. They will go ahead tomorrow, starting tomorrow, lasting all week after those last-ditch talks failed. Some 40,000 members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers, the RMT, who work on the railways in jobs such as maintenance, station staff and signallers, will walk out over pay, conditions, job cuts and reforms. Commuters are being urged to avoid travelling tomorrow, Thursday and Saturday, to be frank, and the days in between as well, given that trains won't be where they should be. So even when the strike's not happening, there'll be disruption. And just over an hour ago, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, spoke to MPs in the House of Commons. He said the unions were shifting the blame for the strikes and opposing progress on the rail network, comments the Shadow Transport Secretary did not, unsurprisingly, agree with.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend, we've seen union leaders use all the tricks in the book to confuse, to obfuscate, to mislead the public. Not only do they wish to drag the railway back to the 1970s, they're also employing the tactics of bygone unions too, deflecting accountability for their strikes onto others, attempting to shift the blame for their action that will cause disruption and will cause damage to millions of people. The union claims that this is a strike about a pay freeze. But this, Mr. Speaker, is factually incorrect. We are not imposing a pay freeze. The whole point of these reforms is, in fact, to build a sustainable, growing railway where every rail worker receives a decent annual pay rise. But let me be clear. For modernisation and reform to work, we have to have unions who are prepared to modernise. Otherwise, there can be no deal. So this strike today isn't about pay. It's about outdated unions opposing progress that will secure the railway's future.
The entire country is about to be ground to a halt, but instead of intervening to try and stop it, the Secretary of State is washing his hands of any responsibility. His own MPs and the public know the only way to sort this out is for the member opposite to do his job.
Let's turn to the journalist and author of British Rail, A New History, Christian Wolmar. Christian Wolmar, welcome to you. The Shadow Secretary of State for Transport there, we just heard from Louise Haigh about an hour ago. She said this strike's going to be unprecedented. I mean, that's clearly not true. It's unprecedented, but it is different from previous strikes, not least in the fact that a lot of people can now work from home. Or I should say, a lot of people who are office workers, but not necessarily some of the blue-collar workers who need to take the train, who are sort of being punished by a trades union.
Let's unpick some of that. Yes, it is very different from before because, of course, in the old days of such strikes, and we haven't really had one as big as this since 1982, there was just British Rail, about which I've written my book. Now there's 13 different train operators involved in this. There's Network Rail. There's Unite, the union, which is also striking, has some white-collar maintenance workers. And so it is a much more complex situation than under the old days of British Rail. And as for kind of affected people, yes, of course, some people will be able to work from home. But as you stated, you know, if you work in a shop or you're a street cleaner or you work in many different industries, you have to turn up to work, and you can't just stay at home and work on a computer. So it will affect quite a lot of people, but not quite everybody in the way that maybe the strikes in the past might have done.
Christian Wolmar, on the spectrum of willingness to reform as an industry, where do we put the railways? I mean, Grant Shapps, when he was at the dispatch box a few moments ago, said, look, you can now test a track using drones. You can send a train along that track that will take 70,000 pictures, I think he said, an hour. You don't need people in high-vis jackets walking down that track, not anymore.
No, Colin, and it's a good question. In fact, over the years, thousands of jobs have been, or tens of thousands of jobs. Just to give you a statistic, again from my book, but it's relevant, that in 1948, British Rail had 650,000 employees. By the time it was privatised and fragmented, it had 150. That means it lost 10,000 employees every year of its 50-year existence. And that process has continued, maybe not quite as fast, but lots of jobs have been basically teched out, as it were. But there's still, you can't run the railway without people. And so there will always be a certain number of people. All this stuff about driverless trains, for example, is total nonsense. That's just a political stunt on the part of Grant Shapps. You're not going to get driverless trains for decades, if ever. You're always going to need some people to operate the signals and control centres, many fewer than before. And
always people in ticket offices, Christian?
You want people on the station as well, which is absolutely crucial for safety purposes.
Just a brief one. Always people in ticket offices?
No, I mean, I do think you need some people in big ticket offices. You know, the London Underground has dispensed with people entirely on ticket offices. I think that's a mistake. You see people around King's Cross and Pancras hanging around not knowing what to do at all. So I think you do need big stations to have ticket offices staffed by people. But you can get away with not staffing lots of smaller stations, but people want to see staff on stations. So if they not sitting behind the ticket office, they should certainly be there at the gate lines and helping people.
Christian Walmart, really good to talk to you. Appreciate your expertise and your time. Thanks a lot. Kelvin Mackenzie's alongside me. What caught your ear there?
Well, actually, he wasn't as socialist as he normally is. I mean, Christian is a long-time Labour supporter, and I thought that he was going to start defending the idea of the strike. I did find his stats amazing, that so many people have been lost. You know, literally 500,000-600,000 people have been lost. I also was surprised that he agreed with the shutting down of the ticket offices.
Can I just read you an email? I mean, just for people who are just switching on, part of the plan it's suggested is to cut back on ticket offices, on booking offices, use the app instead, book your tickets online. I take the view it's a terrible idea. You're a bit more of a moderniser on this, I think, Kelvin. Paul writes to say, sorry, Kelvin. I get to choose emails, which is why you're up the spout on this one. Sorry, Kelvin. A lot of people don't know how to use a smartphone and haven't got somebody to help them to use them. People still need to be able to get help by phoning to speak to a human being.
Well, Paul, I'm afraid I think today you're an outlier with that argument, and I think with a little bit of help, probably from somebody in your family, you could crack it in a heartbeat. You know, getting old doesn't mean you're stupid, right? You've survived a lot of years. So I would say, shut down the ticket office. I know that my one at Weybridge is shut. It's actually supposed to be open. It seems to be shut more times than it's open. So I'm not clear what function it's now performing. After all, each station, you go and do it anyway, even if you haven't gone online and done it.
It'll be selling cappuccinos soon, I imagine.
It's quite right, too. As long as anybody is actually going by train anymore. I mean, this will have another lurch downwards with the numbers that are going to travel by train. And people and companies are going to start having all their offices locally rather than having to commute to central London. Why should you give up 2.5, 3 hours a day when you can do the job just as easily just down the road? You look at the... This applies to me. You look at the office rents that are being charged locally right now, they've gone through the roof.
Very interesting. Kelvin, for now, thanks very much indeed. Well, a new report suggests police forces have failed to solve a single burglary in neighbourhoods in around half of England and Wales. The investigation by The Telegraph found over the last 3 years, 46% of burglary cases closed with no suspect caught or charged. Vera Baird, who's the victims commissioner for England and Wales, has warned there is a risk burglars will feel they can steal with impunity if police officers fail to investigate incidents. Joining me now is the former burglar turned home security expert, Michael Fraser. Michael, I ought to when you that's Kelvin Mackenzie chuckling off camera there at your job description. But it's important to have somebody who can speak whereof they know. An hour ago, we were talking to a former superintendent who feels that the government's lost the plot on this, that burglaries really affect people and chief constables ought to be making them a much higher priority. Is your sense, looking at this policing landscape, one of the police are not taking burglary as seriously as they ought to?
No, I do think the police are taking it seriously. The problem you've got is burglary isn't looked at as a serious crime. If a burglary is committed, you'll get the police out. They will give you a crime prevention officer. They'll give you a crime number for your insurance, but they can't do a lot more because they haven't got the resources. And the problem is, as the public stands, what happens is we tend to do nothing about security until we've been burgled or next door's been burgled or a very close relative. And the problem is, it's just the opportunist. They're looking at it, they look at your property, they see an easy way in and they'll break in and they're back out within 2 minutes. So it's down to us to secure our property so they don't make an attempt to break in.
I understand the need to create not a fortress, but somewhere that's resistant to those opportunist thieves, Michael, but you can end up living in fear, can't you, a little bit?
No, because the opportunists just go in, get what they want and get out. If they so much as touched a person, the police would be there in no time. They'd follow that up. But the problem is there's nothing protecting properties. We all tend to not really think about it. And yes, I am an ex-burglar, but I used to look at a property and you'd see it was easy to get in. We make silly mistakes. People put calendars up in the kitchen with the days they're out facing the window so the burglar can read what days you're out. You've got one lock on the front door. You leave windows open, or you won't obscure the front window so they can see in. Anything they notice, they will use to get into that property. And it is quick. It's not, they're in, they get what they want, and they get out very, very quickly. Burglary will go up if we don't do anything. I always put it in a simple way. It's like you look in your own car park there. 99% of us parallel park, so the wheels are dead straight. 1% will turn the wheels on the car. A car thief will never go for that car because takes longer to move that car. It'll go for the 99% who just parallel park. In a house, you've got lots of things you can do to put off the opportunist trying to break into your property. And I always say, pretend you've lost your keys, stand outside your property. How would you get in? Because you can guarantee the opportunist will think about that within 10 seconds and he'll break in and get what he wants. If we do something to protect the property, he'll move on to the next one.
Michael, very quickly, Kelvin McKenzie wants a pop a question your way.
Michael, one thing is those cameras that are connected to your doorbell, are they a good idea?
Fantastic, because you've got it on your phone. I test loads of cameras and different ideas, and anything you do is fantastic because the Ring doorbell will get a great picture of you coming up to the door. You can even have a small app on your phone with a camera on your property. Anybody walks there, you can talk to them, and you can get a 10-second video of filming them. The police love that because if you've got some evidence of who it is, normally burglaries are committed locally in their own area and everybody knows who these people are. So it's anything you can do like that is a fantastic deterrent.
Michael Fraser, just on that last point, I'm just curious as to how burglary is changing, the methodology and who's doing it to what end. Because it can sometimes feel, if you are, if I can put it this way, sort of low-level criminal, there's so many other ways of making money from crime, not least through drugs or fraud of one description or the other. I just wonder whether it's sort of losing its lustre for criminals.
No, it's not. Because if you look at a burglary, it's committed very quickly. Burglars know it's not going to be followed up. Police haven't got the resources to follow up a normal burglary. And the problem is, once they've done that burglary, it gives them confidence to go on to the next one. It's that's why it's in the news today. It's so hard to find out who's doing it. The police aren't solving it. So more people move into it. So you get more properties burgled. That's why I say we as people have to do something ourselves to secure it. Burglary will never go down until everybody's got a Ring doorbell or camera or some sort of thing on their property to stop them being a target.
Michael, a final thought, and it's about you, if you don't mind, because in the course of my career doing this job, I often interview people who were in a gang, no longer in a gang, and they've turned their lives around and they've turned what was a difficult situation into a positive one. I'm always interested what the conversion experience is. What was yours?
Mine, I grew up in care, children's homes, institutions. When I was 17, I got arrested and my social worker said to me, "You're on your way to prison." Believe it or not, even though I'd grown up in institutions, I was absolutely scared to death to have that hanging over me, a prison sentence. That I went out and got a job. I became very successful and I started doing work on TV, different programmes for the BBC, and the terror of going to prison stopped me in my tracks. Once you go down that route, it's very hard to get out of it because it lives with you forever. You've been to prison.
Michael, so good of you to join us this afternoon. Really appreciate your thoughts. Thanks a lot. Kelvin McKenzie alongside me. Thoughts?
Well, actually, it was actually very entertaining and made some decent points. He actually sounded as though he hadn't been to jail, though.
He hadn't?
No. And so he described himself as an ex-burglar. He was only 17.
You're not quibbling his credentials, for heaven's sake. He talked a lot of sense. And...
Yeah. Well, he wasn't the great train robber, that's for sure.
You'd rather we had more of a hardened criminal in. Kelvin McKenzie.
On there.
There's no pleasing some people. But it is an intimate crime, and it ought to be taken more seriously by chief constables.
But it involves money.
Resources.
It involves resources. And we seem to have a Prime Minister at the moment who wants to throw money at almost anything except those things which seem to matter to us.
Kelvin, for now, thanks very much. You're with Colin Brazier. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, the new head of the British Army has told his troops that they must, quote, prepare to fight in Europe once again following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Got some reaction from a former NATO commander, Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Back soon.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation. We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, you probably don't want to think, if you can avoid it, about the rail strike very much, but we will be returning to that theme. Tomorrow's rail strike going ahead, say the RMT. Grant Shapps has condemned it, unsurprisingly. The Transport Secretary will try and mark your card as to how the week to come looks if you're trying to get around the UK. First, strong words from the new head of the British Army. General Sir Patrick Sanders has told his troops that they must prepare to fight in Europe once again following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Chief of the General Staff, who started his job last week, issued his call to arms in an internal message calling on troops to be ready to fight and win wars on land. Joining me now, former NATO commander, Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Chris Parry, welcome to you. It was a strong message, wasn't it?
Well, it's a message they should have been hearing for about the last 70 years. As members of NATO, the British Army should have been prepared to fight and win on European soil throughout that time.
Is he likely to find himself having a row with the Secretary of State for Defence about the size of the British Army?
Well, I think when the Army works out what it's for, then it can talk about the numbers and the size it wants to be. Because right now, I don't think the Army has a coherent doctrine for future operations. I think Patrick Sanders' words are a good start because it reaffirms that we're back into great power competition, and they've got over the 20-year aberration of operating in Afghanistan and Iraq. If we'd gone ahead with the 1998 Defence Review, the Army would be in much better shape for the sort of wars that it thinks it might have to deter and fight in the 21st century.
For those of us who didn't read it, Chris, what was it? What was the 98 plan?
Well, the 98 plan basically said what the recent integrated review said, and that said that our predominant interest as the United Kingdom is to be predominantly a maritime country, which has an expeditionary capability with regard to the continent of Europe. And I'm afraid all that got dashed by this adventure that we undertook in Afghanistan and the other one in Iraq. And I'm afraid to say that for most of the sort of recent CGSs, we've been hearing that, Afghanistan and Iraq would be typical of the next 50 years. Those of us who aren't Army officers and those of us that have I would say, a more strategic approach, knew that there would be no public or political appetite for that sort of thing, and have been warning about the return of Russia and the rise of China for quite some time. It seems that the Army has finally got the message and is gearing itself up for what I call peer and peer plus conflict. That's good news, but whether they're going to fight on the continent of Europe is a different matter altogether. I believe we should leave land fighting on the continent of Europe to those that need to do it and those that do it best.
Chris Parry, what would you say to those who will argue, not least ex-soldiers, who will say, well, there you go, there's a Royal Navy man arguing for a relatively big Navy compared to a relatively small Army?
Yeah, I mean, I've had cheap shots like that for most of my career. I've had 5 joint jobs. I believe in having strong armed forces across the board. But the fact of life is, until the Army can tell us what it's for, whether it's to fight Russia or China or to do a range of other jobs, there's no point in arguing about numbers or indeed the equipment that it wants. Right now, we're looking at a war in Ukraine, which effectively is the last 20th century war. And we need to look ahead now and see what sort of wars are going to have to be deterred and fought in the 21st century. And I'm afraid to say that I've heard a number of Army officers, senior Army officers over the last few weeks saying, well, here we go. Ukraine proves that actually my agenda, which involves going back into the womb as far as the Army is concerned, is justified. It isn't. There are a lot of new lessons to be learnt in Ukraine, but actually there are a lot of old things that we will leave behind us in future.
Chris Parry, as ever, really interesting. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. Kelvin McKenzie alongside me here. The argument it runs that we're going to see our army shrink by about 10,000 to 73,000, smallest since Napoleonic times, at which point I think Chris Parry would point out, Napoleonic times, we had the biggest navy in the world, and it's the reason we became the successful martial power that we did. He argues that we need a bigger navy and a smaller army, he's got a point.
Well, he has a point. The most interesting thing I thought about the head of the General Staff coming out with that was the fact he said it at all. We have not had any major member of our armed forces pointing out that the enemy actually turns out to be Russia. We've always known China was going to be it, but we've always been surprised now, and it has destroyed political careers. Merkel is nowhere. By the way, Cameron never said a word about it. May never said a word about it. Boris was, well done, Mr. Putin. So what's clear is that no senior army officer could say something like that without getting a nod from number 10. So in the sense that, yes, we're right behind you, OK? So the question now is, are we actually much closer to a war with Russia than stuff that just appears in the papers?
I think that £12 billion you spend every year on foreign aid might be worth a look at.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Kelvin, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, tomorrow will be the Duke of Cambridge's 40th birthday. It's been reported that he, like his father, is in favour of a streamlined royal family, a phrase we've heard many times. We'll discuss whether that's the right approach next. First, latest headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The headlines this hour on GB News. The Transport Secretary says the government is doing everything it can to minimise disruption after the RMT union confirmed rail strikes will be going ahead from tomorrow. And tomorrow, 40,000 rail staff are due to walk out, with more stoppages set for Thursday and then again for Saturday. The RMT General Secretary, Mick Lynch, says the strikes are on because of the government's decision to cut funding from the railway network.
Faced with such an aggressive agenda of cuts to jobs, conditions, pay and pensions, the RMT has no choice but to defend our members industrially and to stop this race to the bottom. The strikes on Network Rail, the train operators and London Underground will go ahead, and we again call on our members to stand firm, support the action, mount the pickets and demonstrate their willingness to fight for workplace justice.
Meanwhile, Heathrow Airport has asked airlines flying from Terminals 2 and 3 to cancel 10% of their services today. That's after technical issues caused huge pile-ups of passengers' luggage at the airport. EasyJet has also announced it's cutting more flights over the summer in response to a cap introduced by Gatwick, with a similar limit being imposed by Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport. A teenage girl trapped underneath fallen rubble has been safely pulled out after a house explosion in Burnley in Greater Manchester. Another man survived, but medics say he is seriously hurt and he's been airlifted to the Royal Preston Hospital. The authorities are still investigating what happened. Energy companies will be prevented from charging high direct debits under plans put forward by the regulator Ofgem. The proposals include rules to protect customers' credit balances and green levy payments if a company goes bust. Suppliers will also be required to have enough money to make sure they can weather future shocks. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Colin Brazier's here in a bit.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And a quick snapshot of today's markets for you. The pound is 1.225 to the dollar. The pound is 1.163 to the euro. And you can buy an ounce of gold for £1,500 and 69 pence.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, transgender swimmers will be banned from competing in women's races if they've been through male puberty. The global swimming regulator, FINA, says the move will make women's swimming fairer and, quote, protect the rights of our athletes to compete. It follows the, as I'm sure you'll be aware, regular viewers on this channel and listeners too, high-profile case of the American trans swimmer Leah Thomas, who caused controversy by smashing women's records earlier this year. FINA plans to establish an open category at competitions for swimmers whose gender identity is different than their recorded birth sex. The Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries, has welcomed what was called the right, or she called the right and sensible decision, has urged other sports to follow the example of swimming's world governing body. Will they? Joining me now, boxing promoter and manager Kelly Maloney. Kelly Maloney, welcome to you and appreciate your time. What do you make of FINA's decision?
Well, I've always said, you know, being a trans woman myself, I've always supported trans women and I like us to be treated as females. I accept we're not biological females, but we go through transition, we go through a lot to get where we are today. And I feel, and I would like to be accepted in society as a female. It's a very hard decision. At one time, I was very much in favour of trans women competing in sports. But I listened and I worked with a number of sports physiologists, and one of the guys I worked with, Joe Dunbar, who I worked with for a number of years, he sort of pointed out certain things to me. And I've listened to a professor called Ross Tucker, who does a sports scientist podcast, and previously he was also in favour of trans women taking part in women's sport. But they seem to have changed their views, and some of their views, some of the points they pointed out to me, has sort of made me think maybe it's right. Maybe certain sports should be just purely for genetic females, and there should be an open category for not just trans women, but for women who want to take part against trans women, biological women taking part against trans women.
Kelly, it just seems the physical strength advantage of that extra bone density and muscle mass is especially marked in swimming, isn't it? Because, I mean, what struck me in the report this morning, the idea that at 14, a boy at 14, the speeds of those boys at 14 are quicker in the pool than the world record-holding woman. It's extraordinary, the difference.
I've not seen that report, but, you know, I know there's a number of reports from both sides. Look, the science world can't agree, the sports world can't agree. It's a subject that is very toxic, but it's a subject, you know, I read an article in The Guardian at the weekend about are trans people accepted in society, and a lot more people are accepting trans people and I see trans women as women, trans men as men.
Yeah, and that may all be so.
No,
yeah.
Just Colin,
go
to finish. The one subject that really turned the barrel, even the ones that were very inclusive, saying yes, trans women are women, were against trans women taking part in female sports. So it's a subject that, until there's complete, utter scientific study done about it, we're never going to know. I know in Australia at the moment, the University of Melbourne and the Institute for Health and Sports at Victoria University are doing an in-depth study, and maybe when that comes out, we will get the right decision.
No, I can go on Google now, Kelly, and I can, because I've obviously moderated conversations about this loads of times, Kelly, and I can honestly the data's
for it and the cases against it. As I said, at the moment, I'm slightly moving that trans women should not in certain sports they should not compete against women, but there are sports where women compete against men, so it's very mixed.
But a lot of it depends on the strength factor. I mean, it's one thing for a jockey to be a man or a woman; it's another thing to be a weightlifter. And I think we get into difficulty.
To hold a horse.
Where we get into difficulty is where we sort of act as if there is no victim to this. It's a victimless conversation. There are victims. The woman who was knocked down to second place.
Victims on both sides.
Well, let me put the case. Well, you're putting the side for one set of victims. Let me put the other side, which is if you are coming second and you should have been first, but Leah Thomas wins. If the Kiwi weightlifter knocks you down to silver, those Corinthian days when it was just sport and it didn't really matter very much. It was just for the glory. That's for the birds. This is big money. Careers. Livelihoods rest on going for gold.
There is no level playing field in sport. There's no such thing as a level playing field in sport. But what we've got to look at is fairness and safety in sport. They're the two things that I think must take priority. And you say about the women weightlifter in New Zealand. Where did she come? She didn't come anywhere. You talk about the swimmer in America. She only won one race. She didn't break any records by it when I last, unless she's raced since all the controversy about her.
But what do you say, Kelly? Go on.
I'm just saying it's a subject that we're never all going to agree on, and even I don't agree on it. So I mean, and I'm not a scientist, so I don't. I can only talk from talking to the people like Joe Dunbar, to Professor Ross Tucker, and as I say, they are slowly moving me to agree that yes, there should be a women's only category in sport, and there should be an open category as well.
And it's always refreshing when people are prepared to, keep an open mind and maybe change their mind, based on the facts, as you've explained, as part of your thinking on this. But there will be some people who will say, accepting totally, Kelly, what you say about the numbers being really small, and I take your point about Leah Thomas and the Kiwi weightlifter. They were probably never going to be gold medal winning Olympians. But there will be people who will say, OK, but this is the thin end of the wedge. And there'll be others.
Yeah, I agree to that. And that's why we need proper in-depth study. And we need the scientists to come together, because you've got, as you said, you can go on Google, and I've been on this since I was asked to come on your show, and I've read reports that say trans women should take part, and I've read reports that say trans women shouldn't take part. So if the science world can't agree and the medicine world can't agree, how can we as just general human beings agree?
Kelly Maloney, there we have to leave it, but we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Kelvin McKenzie alongside me. What's catching your ear?
Well, I knew Kelly when she was Frank Maloney, and my thought process on this is, how would he have liked it if a male boxer had transed and gone in and fought a female boxer? What would have happened? I'll tell you what would have happened. He'd have broken her jaw in about 22 seconds, a very dangerous aspect to sport. And it's unclear to me how Kelly can actually argue in that manner, whether she would have known above all else what the effect of the male gene in a trans body would have done in a boxing ring. I thought that was a disingenuous argument.
As we say in the jargon, we've goodbyed Kelly. So, because it would be quite good to get Kelly's response to that, but we'll have to wait for another day. The Daily Mail royal editor Rebecca English wrote yesterday that Prince William, like his father, believes in a slimmed-down royal family. It's reportedly seen as one way to ensure the continued existence of the institution. As we approach the Duke's 40th birthday tomorrow, we're asking whether Prince William has the right idea. We've posed this question before. It's been posed many times. Should we have a slimmed-down monarchy? Joining me, the former Sun Royal correspondent Charles Ray and the former butler to Prince Charles and William, Grant Harold. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Charles, we'll start with you if we can. With the slimmed-down monarchy, bicycling monarchies, Dutch-style monarchies. We've been here before.
Yes, we have, but we are in the process of having a slimmed-down monarchy. It's something that the Prince of Wales has been advocating for some time, and the Mail have taken it up. But this is nothing new. William is very much like his father on this, and we are already started to see a slimmed-down monarchy by the very fact that Harry and Meghan have decided to go and live in California, and the disgraced Duke of York is basically locked away in a cupboard forever and a day. So the actual working royals are about half a dozen now. So it is going to continue to be a slimmed-down monarchy.
And Grant, in a sense, the palace and the Queen has signalled her feelings on this. If you think back to that balcony shot on the Sunday of the Jubilee weekend, there she was, Charles, I think Camilla was there, the Cambridges and their 3 children, and that's your lot.
Good afternoon, Colin. Good afternoon, Charles. Absolutely. I mean, we can all see the monarchy has been slimming down, and that is what's happening. The thing that I always kind of bear in mind is that I'm not sure how wise it's going to be going forward, because I think a lot of people want it to slim down, but we've seen in recent months, over the last year, with the Queen not being able to fulfil her duties like she's done in the past, which is totally understandable. She's relying on the support of her family, and it's not just that future royal family that we all know that's going to come eventually. It's the other members of the royal family, as they used to be called, the add-ons, the extras, and we've seen them actually stepping into different roles, including the Duke of Kent recently on the balcony with the Queen over the Jubilee celebrations. So they very much are there to support the monarchy, and what's going to be interesting in the future, obviously it will scale down, but what's going to be interesting to see if Prince William gets to the same age as his grandmother, possibly struggles. It'll be interesting to see who will pick that up. Will it be the children, the grandchildren? Will there be other cousins? Will the other cousins still be around at that point who might then come in and help? Will his brother possibly ever be asked to come along and help? So I'm just interested to see how it's going to unfold in the coming decades.
Because, Charles Ray, in a sense, Grant's sort of hinting at this. I had a conversation 6 months ago with somebody who knows about this well, who said, he said to me, have you got any idea how many requests come into the palace for the ribbon opening and the tree planting and the opening of the new village hall? If it was just down to that hardcore of half a dozen, they'd be doing 50 engagements a day.
Yes, but they're not going to do all the engagements. I mean, you are absolutely right. It's thousands of requests come in for a member of the royal family to do X, Y, Z, and they can't all be taken on board. And with the slimmed down monarchy that we've now on seeing, they'll have to do as much as they can, but certainly won't be doing 50 jobs a day. It's impossible. It's not possible. And Grant's right as well. We have to wait. We've got this nucleus of 6 at the moment, and the next 3 who will come along the line when they grow up a little bit will be George, Charlotte, and Louis. But that's way in the future. And I just think we're going to have this nucleus now for the foreseeable future.
Charles Ray, Grant Harold, I'm afraid we've got to leave it there. We're running low on time, but really appreciate yours today. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
All railway ticket offices set to close under controversial new plans. Depends how you read the story on this. Some plans to switch to online ticketing. Passengers, in theory, would have no alternative but to book online and download tickets as part of a rail industry strategy to save up to £500 million a year. The plan, if it's as reported, would phase out paper tickets and ticket offices, booking offices in England, a process that begins in some form from September. Householders currently subsidise the railways, as you know, to the tune of £1,000 a year. I don't know who put this script in, but it's more like £600 a year per family, isn't it? Is the figure?
It's unbelievable that it's subsidised at all when you look at the prices of travelling around the UK.
Well, let's turn to somebody who's going to ponder on this one for us. That is Mal Fletcher, futurist. There's a title, and chairman of the 2030 Plus Futurist organisation. Mal, thanks so much for your time. Kelvin and I were having a disagreement about this. I take the view that booking offices, ticket offices are really important, not just for people who are a little bit older or not so au fait with an app, but sometimes navigating our railways can be really complicated. Season tickets, awkward routes, etc.
Yeah, thank you for Colin. Colin, it's good to be with you. Look, I'd probably lean more your way in this case because this is part of a trend, of course, with the worlds of business as well as public services. We've already seen the emergence of things like automated supermarkets in London, almost fully automated banking in parts of the country now. But one of the major lessons I think we took from the COVID pandemic was that a growing engagement with high tech requires a growing commitment to high touch. Human beings thrive on social interaction, and a lack of it isn't particularly healthy. And there's certain things we can do digitally, but as we talk now, I can't read your subtle facial signals as I would if we were in a room face to face. So train companies will certainly save money by closing down sales centres, but in the longer term, they may also reduce public trust because they've reduced their human face. And trust, after all, I think is the key to success in any enterprise, but especially for public services.
Yeah. Mal, would we have to legislate for this? I'm totally with you. 8 million people in this country now live alone. I think we're becoming a more atomised society. I wrote about the closure of my local supermarket and all those poor checkout ladies, principally, who were getting thrown on the scrap heap. But, of course, the supermarket concerned was desperate to reduce costs. And it didn't matter that the little old lady and little old gentleman who maybe had their one human interaction a week got it from those checkouts.
Yeah, well, I think it does matter. I think every individual matters. And one of the other problems with all of this is the technology side of it, the tendency for data outages. Most of us know that in March of 2020, I think it was, 4 of our biggest phone providers went down for 5 hours. So millions of people, elderly, young, poor, rich, couldn't access their accounts. So what happens to your important travel plans in this case if you suddenly find that your phone has no service in a no Wi-Fi zone, or worse, if you find the train company's online server is temporarily out of order? Now, I'm not advocating a Luddite solution. Of course, I'm not. We shouldn't abandon the use of these technologies, but I'm suggesting we need public services that are reliable and accessible to everyone equally all the time.
Mal Fletcher, it's fascinating. Wish I had more time, but appreciate yours again. Thanks very much indeed. Michelle Dewberry is going to tell you what's coming up on her show right now. Michelle.
Yeah, Colin, you know, I like that job title of futurist. I'm going to claim it as my own now because I'm going to be a futurist and tell you what's coming ahead. What, in 6 minutes, 5 minutes' time? We'll be talking about a report today that looks at what's been going on in Oldham when it comes to child sexual exploitation. You know, Colin, we go around in circles with this all the time. What is the answer to this? How are we going to stop young people being sexually exploited? And I don't even think it's taken seriously enough. I'll be looking at why not. Also, strikes, of course, we'll be talking about that, all happening this week. And also, I'm asking a simple question. Do you trust the media?
Ooh, that's a thorny one. Michelle, thanks very much indeed. I've got just the right person to answer that question. Kelvin McKenzie, in 10 seconds.
Well, I used to have a sign up on the Sun newsroom which said, make it up and make it early. And then Murdoch saw it. He could get that bloody thing down. We've got to live with it. Thanks very much indeed. Michelle Dewberry's up next. Stand by.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. It's turned into a warm and sunny day for many of us, and there's more to come during the next few days. Cloudier conditions in the north and rain for some overnight as a weak cold front pushes into the northwest of Scotland and makes its way across the rest of Scotland and Northern Ireland by dawn. But to the south, a ridge of high pressure holds firm, hence the warm sunshine that we see outside at the moment, and more of that clear weather continues into the evening. However, for the north of Scotland, some persistent rain arrives, moderate in places. Now, as the weather front sinks south into the central belt during the early hours, as well as parts of Northern Ireland, well, the rain tends to peter out. Enough cloud for Scotland and Northern Ireland to avoid a cool night, 12 or 13 Celsius here. Much cooler further south under the clear spells, and although we'll see some sunshine first thing, temperatures in some spots could be into the low single figures. So bit of a chill first thing, but it will soon warm up because it's another sunny day for much of England and Wales. I think the far north of England, the likes of Cumbria, Northumberland, will see a bit more cloud arriving, perhaps the odd shower. Further showers to come for eastern Scotland, where it will be on the cool side. A lot of cloud for the north, but further south, again across the bulk of England as well as Wales, sunshine and rising temperatures, 25 Celsius for parts of eastern England, for example. Into Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, it looks like we'll keep a lot of cloud for the far northwest, some showery rain, mostly on the light side into northwest Scotland. Otherwise, most parts dry with lengthy clear spells for eastern Scotland, much of England and Wales, and a warmer night to come, temperatures in places holding up in the teens. So after that warm start, for many on Wednesday, it's another sunny one. In fact, a brighter start for eastern Scotland, parts of northern England, compared with Tuesday. And, well, Thursday marks the peak in temperatures this week. In places, high 20s or even 30 Celsius.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation. We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.